A very good morning, student. In this video, I am going to discuss few important questions which are usually asked in Viva on the structures which are passing, say for example, blood vessels, the veins, the nerve, which pass through the various foramina which are seen on the basal aspect of the skull. If we are seeing the base of the skull from inside, that is from cranial cavity, that means all those foramina which are seen in the norma, basalis, interna. So these are some few important questions which I am going to discuss about this. Now let us see, this is the anterior cranial fossa. So in this slide I will just put some of the questions which are usually asked on the structures which are attached or passing through the anterior cranial fossa. Now the anterior cranial fossa form the floor for the resting of the frontal lobe of the brain. So on this orbital plate, the frontal lobe of the brain of the right and the left cerebral hemisphere, they rest. This is the crista galli, and this crista galli gives attachment to a structure and he will ask you, the examiner, which structure is attached to the crista galli, which is the a bony projection. You should say that the crista galli gives attachment to that of the anterior end of the falx cerebri. On either side of the crista galli, you are seeing the cribriform plate on the right side as well as on left side of the crista galli. Then he will ask you what are the structures which are passing or which structures are passing through these foramina. You should say that from these multiple foramina which are present on the cribriform plate, there are the multiple nerves, okay, olfactory nerve they come from the nasal mucous membrane and will end into the bulb of the olfactory nerve which lies here on the cresta, on this cribriform plate. Then he may ask that there is a foramina which is called as foramina cecum. Which structure passes through the foramina cecum? You should say that excuse me, that it is a blind foramina, that's why it is called as foramina cecum. But sometime if it is patent, then a vein can come from the after draining the mucous membrane of the nose, and it can drain into the superior sagittal sinus. And another question in this area may be that which which sinus, dural venous sinus, lies in relation to the lesser wing of the sphenoid. I am moving my pointer on the lesser wing of the sphenoid, and you should say that the sinus which is in relation to the less free margin of the lesser wing of the sphenoid is the sphenoparietal sinus. Okay, it is the sphenoparietal sinus. To the anterior clinoid process and to the posterior clinoid process, the diaphragm celli is attached. Okay, now this many questions can be asked from the anterior cranial fossa, and quickly I will pass to the middle cranial fossa. Now in the middle cranial fossa, this where I am moving the pointer, it is sulcus chiasmaticus, which gives lodgement to that of the optic chiasma. In the first diagram, I am moving the pointer onto the optic chiasma. So there may be a question that what lies in the sulcus chiasmaticus. You should say that it is the optic chiasma, which is formed by the decussation of the two optic nerves, right and left optic nerve. They decussate in this sulcus chiasmaticus to form the optic chiasma which lies. Then another question will be there that what passes through this canal, optic canal, which is medial and inferior to the anterior clinoid process. You can see this optic canal. you can say that through this optic canal, the optic nerve comes out after this attachment to the eyeball. This optic nerve is surrounded by the meninges, dura, arachnoid and pia mater. It comes to form the optic nerve, which will form the optic chiasma as it is seen here. Just infralateral to this optic nerve, in this optic canal lies the ophthalmic artery. So you should say that optic nerve and ophthalmic artery, they pass through this optic canal. Okay, let's move to the next slide, where we can see another question will be there. Just below the free margin of the lesser wing of the sphenoid, there will lie a fissure, elongated fissure, which is called a superior orbital fissure. And the next question will be, what structure passes through the superior orbital fissure of the middle cranial fossa? You should say that this gives passage to the three cranial nerves, the third, fourth and sixth, that is oculomotor, two division of oculomotor, that is superior division and inferior division, where I am moving my pointer. Then there is an abducent nerve, the sixth cranial nerve, and this is the trochlear nerve, which is the fourth cranial nerve. They pass through the superior orbital fissure. Beside this, the three branches of the nerve, what is called as ophthalmic nerve, they also pass. These three branches are the frontal nerve, the lacrimal nerve and the nasociliary nerve. These are three branches of the ophthalmic nerve, which is the branch from the trigeminal nerve, the fifth cranial nerve. It also, then you should also say that beside this, it also gives passage to the two different veins called as the superior and inferior ophthalmic vein. So this will complete your superior orbital fissure and structures passing through the superior. They are coming, they are going from middle cranial fossa towards the orbit, okay, orbital cavity. Okay, the veins are coming from orbit towards the middle cranial fossa and will drain into the cavernous sinus. Okay, let us go to the other structures which pass through various foraminas of the middle cranial fossae. Now the middle cranial fossa, the structures which are seen, okay, they are the foramina rotundum. I am putting my pointer onto the foramina rotundum on either side of this hypophyseal fossa. He may ask you what lies in this hypophyseal fossa, which is a midline fossa. You should say that anterior pituitary lies here. From the foramina rotundum, the maxillary nerve, which is a branch of the trigeminal, second branch which passes. Then through the foramina ovale, you can say many structure passes, but mainly it is the mandibular division of trigeminal nerve which passes through foramina ovale and the lesser petrosal nerve along with the emissary vein. They pass through the foramina ovale. Just posterolateral to foramina ovale, there is a very small foramina here, that is foramina spinosum, from which this groove is extending laterally, and through this foramina passes the middle meningeal artery. So the foramina spinosum will give passage to the middle meningeal artery. If you are giving answer very well, then he can ask the two another hiatuses about which gives passage to the greater and lesser superficial petrosal nerve. These hiatus are known as the hiatus for greater superficial petrosal nerve, which is close to the apex and anterior surface of the petrous temporal bone. This nerve, the greater superficial petrosal nerve, will come from this hiatus and will go to the nerve of the pterygoid canal, and this is begins at the anterior margin of the foramina lacerum. This, where I am moving the pointer, is the foramina lacerum. So it will go into the anterior margin into the canal. Okay, this is the greater superficial, the lesser superficial petrosal nerve, which will come out from the hiatus of, or the lesser super, will go towards the foramina ovale. So these two nerves, greater and lesser superficial petrosal nerve, will respectively go through the anterior margin of the foramina lacerum, and the lesser will go through the foramina ovale into the infratemporal fossa, where it will meet the atic ganglion. Okay, so these are the structure which he may ask in the middle cranial fossa. Okay, let's move to the posterior cranial fossa. In the posterior cranial fossa, the important foramina is the internal acoustic meatus. He will ask you, what are the structure which passes through the internal acoustic meatus? Tell him that the two different cranial nerves, that is the seventh cranial nerve facial and the vestibulocochlear nerve, they pass through this internal acoustic meatus, and along with a artery also goes inside this, and that is the labyrinthine vessels. Okay, that is artery and vein labyrinthine vessels, they will also go, which are branched from the basilar artery, they will go into this. Ultimately this facial nerve is a motor nerve, but then the vestibulocochlear nerve is a sensory nerve which will come out, while the facial nerve motor component will go in the internal acoustic meatus. Then there is a big foramina which is irregular foramina, where I am moving this. This is called as jugular foramina. He will ask you what structures they pass through the jugular foramina. It gives passage to many structures, but you tell him that there are three important nerves which passes through jugular foramina. Anterior and medial part gives passage to that of the glossopharyngeal nerve, then middle part gives passage to the 10th cranial nerve, that is the vagus nerve, and the lateral most part and lateral most and posterior part gives passage to that of the 11th cranial nerve. Thus the jugular foramina gives passage to the 9th, 10th and the 11th cranial nerve, along which from the anteriormost part of the jugular foramina also passes the inferior petrosal sinus. Similarly, from the posteriormost part of the jugular foramina also passes the sigmoid sinus. So, after passing through sigmoid sinus, this sigmoid sinus will become the internal jugular vein. Okay, so the sigmoid sinus will form the internal jugular vein on the inferior aspect of the jugular foramina. Okay, so these are the important structures which pass through the jugular foramina. Then naturally the question will come, what structures they pass through the largest foramina, okay, of the body, that is the foramina magnum. You should say that foramina magnum gives passage to the lowest part or the lowermost part of the medulla oblongata. Never say that it is a spinal cord which passes. It is the lowermost part of the medulla oblongata, or medulla passes through it, and it is covered by three meninges. So you should say that medulla covered by three meninges, dura, arachnoid and pia, it passes through that. In the subarachnoid space, there will be the arteries, the vertebral arteries, they are going towards the cranial cavities. Then spinal accessory nerve is just going from the vertebral canal to that of the posterior cranial fossa. So these are some of the important structure, along with the spinal arteries, anterior and the two posterior spinal arteries, they are also going down onto the spinal cord through the foramina magnum. So these many are the structures which pass through anterior cranial fossa, the middle cranial and the posterior cranial fossa. You should learn it well, because these viva are important one, and they are always asked what structures passes through various foramina of the base of the skull. Okay, norma, basalis, interna. Okay, I have taken these diagrams or illustrations from the Grand Atlas of Anatomy, and I was the author and say I was the editor for this South Asian edition, okay, which I edited about a year back. Okay, thank you very much for watching.